Hello everyone. In this topic, we'll discuss about authentication methods. Authentication is the process of establishing the identity of a person, service, or device. The person, service, or device have to prove who they are using the credentials. For example, if you are traveling in a train or in a plane, you have the valid ticket, and it is you who are authorized to enter into the train or flight. So the authentication is also similar to that. You need to prove who you are to access any service or resources. Azure supports multiple authentication methods, including standard password, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and also passwordless. New authentication solution provide both security and convenience. So let's see which authentication is convenient and secure. In this diagram, it shows the security level compared to the convenience. If I am using the standard password and two-factor authentication, this is multi-factor authentication. Since I need to have the device, it can be an hardware token, it can be RSA token or mobile device to get the token. So I need to keep this device always along with me to authenticate. So this is inconvenient. And if the internet is not working and I am not able to receive the token, then I'll not be able to authenticate. But when I am using two-factor authentication, it is considered as highly secured way of authentication. And if I am using the standard way of using the password, so I have the standard passwords, I can keep all my passwords in a notepad. So that is the reason we have this as categorized as low security. Since I am keeping all the password which is required to access multiple application, and this file where I am storing the password, it can be easily copied by someone. So that is the reason this way of using the password, which is standard password, it is considered as low security, and it is very convenient because I can use the password, I can copy the password in a notepad or a text file. There is another method of authentication, which is passwordless authentication. You use Windows Allow for Business using the PIN or biometric to configure the passwordless authentication. This is considered as high security, and also it is very convenient because you are not going to remember the password to access multiple applications or resources. The devices which you are going to use to authenticate, it will be registered with the authentication provider. Let us see what is single sign-on. SSO or single sign-on enables a user to sign in one time and use the credential to access multiple resources. For example, if I have an organization and my organization name is called contoso.com. So this organization has multiple applications: HR application, time application, travel application, and also Azure Office 365 application. For the user, for example, John at contoso.com. To access all these applications, John doesn't require multiple credentials. So he require only John at contoso.com, and he can access all these applications. For SSO to work, the different application and providers must trust the initial authenticator. So these are the application provider, and these application provider has to trust the initial authenticator. So only if these application trust contoso.com, only then the employees will be able to access all these applications. Single sign-on is very useful. There is no need to manage multiple credentials. With single sign-on, you remember only one user ID and password, and you will be able to access multiple applications. Single sign-on is only as secure as the initial authenticator because the subsequent connections are all based on the security of initial authenticator. In this case, initial authenticator is the organization domain controller, and if the directory service is being hacked, John at Contessa.com is the original employee or real employee who has access to all these applications. If his email ID and credentials has been hacked by any hacker, then he has the access for all these applications because he will be authenticating to the initial authenticator. Once he has been authenticated, since it is single sign-on, you will be able to access all these applications which was supposed to be accessed by John at Contessa.com. What is multi-factor authentication? Multi-factor authentication is the process of prompting a user for extra form of identification during the sign-in process. When you have entered your password and if the application or website requires additional credential to be used to authenticate, either it can be phone call, it can be SMS, it can be PIN, it can be biometric, or it can be a simple question and answer. So all these are all considered as multi-factor authentication. Apart from the standard password which you have used to authenticate, along with the standard password, you need to use any one of these element. So this will be your multi-factor authentication. We need to configure multi-factor authentication so that the identity provider knows which option you are going to use as a multi-factor authentication. Either it can be Microsoft Windows All for Business, or it can be your registered phone. Multi-factor authentication provides additional security as you need two or more elements to prove you are the valid user. So multi-factor authentication is actually going to provide additional layer of security. Multi-factor authentication also protect you against a password compromise. Even if your standard password is hacked, just by knowing the password of an user, the hacker cannot intrude into your system. Hacker need to know your other credential as well. So if the other credential is your phone or biometric, the hacker needs to know that as well to authenticate. How does the multi-factor authentication works? Once the user has entered his standard password, there are three categories which can be configured with multi-factor authentication, which can be something the user knows. The user will be challenged with a question. So for this question, the user has the answer. Right? Something the user has, something the user possesses with him always. So this will be his mobile phone. After entering the standard password, the user will receive phone call. He has to answer the phone call to authenticate, or it can be a simple OTP pin, OTP code, which will be sent to his mobile phone via the SMS. So usually the banking website, after entering your standard user ID and password, you will be asked to use another credential. Either it can be phone call or the OTP pin which will be received via the SMS. And the third one is something the user is. The user is, which means physically, which can be used to authenticate, which is nothing but the biometric. Either it can be fingerprint or face scan. So we now know what is standard credentials and how to integrate the multi-factor authentication. Let us now see what is Microsoft ENTRA multi-factor authentication. Microsoft multi-factor authentication is a service in ENTRA ID which provides multi-factor authentication capabilities. Microsoft ENTRA multi-factor authentication enables user to choose one more step of authentication to prove who they are during the sign-in process. It can be a phone call, it can be an SMS, even a Microsoft Authenticator app installed on the phone, or it can be an RSA token as well. So now let us see what is passwordless authentication. Passwordless authentication, it's a convenient way of authentication. Now we don't need any more password. it's replaced with what you have. So what you have is, I have my personal computer or I have my mobile device. So to use the passwordless authentication, I need to configure the user. So I need to register these devices onto the Azure Entra ID. So what I have to do is, I have to change the security parameter for the user. I'll say for the user, the authentication type is passwordless. So if I have selected the authentication for the user is passwordless, then it will ask, so what are you using for the passwordless authentication? It can be an app, it can be hello, or it can be Fido. So these are the three methods which we have to configure for the user to use the passwordless authentication. Passwordless authentication need to be set up on the device. So this is what we are doing. We need to set up the device before it can work. Once I have registered these devices and enable the passwordless authentication, this device will be registered. Only from this device, if this device uses allow for business, then the user will use PIN or thumbprint to log in. So now we know the three methods which can be used for passwordless authentication. Let us see what is Windows Allow for Business. Windows Allow for Business, this is a biometric or PIN credential for the user to use. So this is available in the laptop. So nowadays, when you have the laptop, so it comes with the fingerprint scanner. So if you are having the laptop and if you have installed Windows 10 or 11, you have the Windows Allow for Business, so which will support the PIN or biometric. Either you can use PIN or biometric and you will be able to access your application in the organization, or you can also access the resources in Azure. Another method to use the passwordless authentication is Microsoft Authenticator app. You need to download the Microsoft Authenticator app on your iOS, which is Apple phones or Android phones. Once you have downloaded the app, you need to register this device in the Azure. So you register your device into the Azure, which is Entra ID, and you will configure as the work, school, or business. You will see the number on your mobile phone. And when you try to access any application, you need to input this number. There is also another method for passwordless authentication, which is FIDO2 security keys. FIDO2 security keys is part of Alliance who promote open standard for authentication, and this Alliance also support passwordless authentication. So FIDO2 uses USB devices, and also it will support Bluetooth or NFC. You just need to plug the USB device on your mobile phone or the computer so that you can use passwordless authentication. And FIDO2 is the latest standard that incorporates the web authentication. So in summary, we have discussed about authentication methods, and we have discussed about single sign-on. We have also discussed about multi-factor authentication and methods for multi-factor authentication. We have also discussed about passwordless authentication. I will see you in the next topic. Thank you for watching the video. If you like the content, please subscribe and share the video. Thank you and take care.